It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Erwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza.
Erwin, my friend, hello.
Good morning.
And good morning to you. I guess, we can let on that we actually are usually recording in the morning. We're not doing happy hour anymore.
No. I've really cut
Although,
back on my happy hour alcohol consumption, I might add, for some. I don't know. I woke up one day and I said, I don't really feel it that much anymore. I'm married to a teetotaler, like Rachel, my wife doesn't, I've never seen her take a glass of wine. I mean, she's really like a complete
I
teetotaler. So
didn't know that. Yeah.
I don't know after almost 43 years, if that's rubbing off on me, but maybe. Who knows? But anyway, Esperanza, I guess we're going to go into the northern reaches of Amagansett by way of Cincinnati.
I know this is such an interesting thing to us, isn't it? That we have this really close connection with the Midwest. And I'd love to explain it. We've talked about Wiborg, Frank Wiborg.
That's right.
There was another Cincinnati connection.
That's right. And Cincinnati connection. And to our Hamptons podcast audience, Esperanza and I are going to go into the Devon Colony, a section of Amagansett. I'm not going to say it's off radar, but it's a little bit more, out of what one would really associate with Amagansett, I would say.
That and I don't think that people tend to go, Devon Colony, it's an estate district, right? Which it really is.
Right. Yes.
Originally, this is a group of mansions, because they are mansions, much larger than what would be a comparable thing. We've talked about, you and I, the Seven Sisters, which we did that episode on. Those seemed to me like they were, substantial size, but not as large as this. These were much larger. Let's blame the Midwesterners on our supersizing homes out here.
Yeah, I
in
guess
the early 1900s.
That's very funny. And I guess Esperanza, we not going to say I'm going to give props to Arthur Benson, because I'm not, but I guess Arthur Benson, i.e. Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, those Seven Sisters were whatever, 4,500, 5,500 square foot houses.
Were
much smaller,
modest in comparison.
Comparison.
Maybe there's something to do with more sort of East Coast, New York City centric, apartment living, tight quarters. Oh, you come out here, it's like, broad expanses, but you don't have to have like a huge place. Whereas Midwest, broad, big open spaces, and maybe that just invited this kind of mentality for big construction. I don't know.
It's very good. We really need to put this on video, because I'm watching Esperanza extending her arms out. It's quite entertaining to watch this on Zoom, but I get where you're going.
What's also interesting is, if we continue with the comparison, you have the Seven Sisters being like this reference of Hampton's architecture, right? Of shingle style.
Shingle style, that's right.
These are not remotely that. This is like the Mediterranean on Gardiners Bay.
1,000%. And we should really tell our audience what the specifics of what we're talking about, and to expand on what Esperanza was just mentioning about this construction of these houses, which were essentially stucco over concrete, Italianate villa style, if you will. But this colony was from Cincinnati. It was founded in 1908. I'm going to read off of these names, because some of them are going to ring a few bells. William Cooper Procter, Procter and Gamble, still out there. Richmond Levering, Lever Brothers. And then there were two others, Joseph Rawn and William Rowe, who was the banker. These were the four main settlers of what is called the Devon Colony
Mhm.
from Cincinnati. Again, Esperanza made the connection. Frank Wiborg, arguably the most important house in East Hampton Village in its day. We did a whole terrific podcast about that. But these four people really discovered this area on a hunting trip. And there's another Esperanza with Arthur
Right.
Benson. Arthur Benson developed the Seven Sisters with 10,000 Montauk acres as basically a hunting lodge for his
Right.
friends. I mean, this was the same
Exactly. Yeah.
storyline.
Well, it gives you an idea of how truly rural, how wild this place was still at that time, obviously.
That's right. We've talked on our Hamptons,
Wild and unsettled, I mean,
wild,
not
right.
relatively uninhabited is
It,
more my
Exactly,
point.
exactly correct. And we've talked often how this was, a fishing community, a farming community. But to Esperanza's point, especially in the section we're talking about, this was the wilds. I mean, it was just wide open, very different. Again, we've gone over the bookends of East Hampton and Southampton. They were already summer colonies to a large extent at this era, but this was I want to use that for the rest of this podcast. Esperanza, the Wilds.
The
That's what this place really
wilds.
should be called. It's called
Well,
the Highlands. It
the
should be called the
Highlands.
Wylands, right?
I was just going to say, which I really appreciate, is this name of the Amagansett Highlands, which they are, because topographically it does rise up from, what is it, like 90 feet above sea level, correct?
Right.
Something like that.
And to get exactly correct is according to what our researchers told us, it's 90 feet above sea level. These four gentlemen purchased 1,000 acres there. To give you a perspective geographically of where we are, this is really not a large enclave. I mean, it's really the main street is Oceanview Lane, which runs between Cranberry Hole Road and Abraham's Landing Road.
Once upon a time had an ocean view, or maybe still does
That's
in
right.
certain points.
Still, the elevation is high. I've been on I've been in this neighborhood many a time. You still get an ocean view when you're there, probably more so, I'd say, Esperanza, at this point in the winter
Right. Well,
when the
that would,
foliage is down.
the Highlands to me indicates this was not as uh, populated with trees or, higher vegetation back
Right.
then as it
That's
is today,
correct.
which would obstruct the view.
Absolutely correct. And it was also very near, obviously, Gardiners Bay to the north.
Mhm.
And this colony, it should also be mentioned, also established. We now know it as the Devon Yacht Club, but part of what this colony established was the Gardiners Bay Boat Club, also in 1908. Really just right down the road from walking distance, really, from these streets, and just again, we always try to transport our audience to a place, Esperanza. And if you could imagine early 1900s in this sort of out of the way, if you will,
Mm.
it's even, it's a little secluded now, 100 plus years later. But back then, this was out of the way,
Yeah.
for Eastern Long Island, to use Esperanza's term, wild. Um, they did bring in a Cincinnati architectural firm, Teidig Lee, was the who constructed these Italianate villa style, and you could see these houses. I mean, we'll get into the big house in a minute, but that's the most important one. It's right on Oceanview Lane, right at the corner of Cranberry Hole. It's enormous, and you could see that stucco over concrete construction. Esperanza, they did use a local building contractor
Oh yeah, Mr.
with the last
Hildreth.
name Hildreth.
Yeah, James
You know,
Hildreth.
exactly.
But yeah, it's really this Teidig and Lee architectural firm was also from Cincinnati, so they, even imported that.
Right.
And the Italian villa style, as we touched on earlier, um, was something that they seem to have, kind of specialized in, and very classical architecture. as
Yeah.
opposed to like a shingle style
Right.
established by a McKim Mead and White.
And I'm going to guess, Esperanza, that might not have been the most common building style out here circa early 1900s.
I'm
You know,
going
I
to agree with you, although,
you know,
there are a few a little scattered here and
right.
there. And then of course we have the reference with more recently of our podcast that we did on what's it called? Fairfield.
Fairfield? Yes.
Fairfield, yes.
Right. Right.
Which is not unlike this architecture. So
Yeah.
interesting how that continues to repeat itself.
And again, you do see that, going along. And it goes on to say, I mean, and again, thinking of the era, yes, these houses were enormous, no question about it. We can go gone down this road a million times, but Long Island Gold Coast mansions of this era were similar in size. So this was
Right.
not, this stuff was not all that, not all that unusual. But what really is, in addition to establishing, the yacht club, uh, this is reminiscent, Esperanza. We were talking about this before the episode of when we talked about the Bell Estate. I mean, what these people
Mhm.
did here, they paved roads, they built a power plant.
Yeah, I mean, they
They,
had to put in the infrastructure,
yeah,
right? That's
literally,
like
exactly.
this was pre-zoning, pre-planning, pre-everything. They would just they planned, they did. It's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, and there were homes, there were bathhouses, and in this neighborhood, there were also smaller houses. I guess they had for guests or whatever. They actually had a casino within what is now the Devon Yacht Club. And Esperanza and I were talking about this previously before we went on air. And Esperanza was mentioning, well, it wasn't. I'm sure it wasn't a casino with slots and all of these things that you
Right.
associate.
No, like bright lights and yeah.
Yeah,
And
it was sort of a different
a different type of casino.
a different type of it's a very private one, Esperanza. I mean, these high rollers might have just been playing amongst the four of them. I mean, who
Mm,
knows what was going on here? But
exactly, yeah.
we should also mention this really cool nickname they gave the place, or the community gave this place, Soap Hill.
The locals, yes,
Yeah.
of course. I mean, given the fact that it was Procter and Gamble and Lever Brothers, I think
Yeah,
that was totally appropriate
and
and in true Bonnick fashion, right?
it really wasn't. It was described here, this little article from the Rob report I found from January, actually, of this year, how, to your point, it initially garnered a contemptuous reputation among some of the more, and I quote, highbrow Hamptonites as
Oh, so
Soap
more
Hill.
highbrow.
Yeah, yes, apparently, I mean, I
Apparently
suppose
there were others who were um I don't know, older
who could,
money, or what do you
I,
call
I
that?
mean,
I don't
I
even
mean,
know.
honestly, who could have been that much more
I
highbrow
so
than these people?
my mistake. I thought it was the locals that had called it Soap Hill. It was actually other highbrow or more
Yeah,
highbrow Hamptonites.
no,
I
I
don't
mean,
know. I think Rob Report needs some fact checking.
I Esperanza's a lot more unleashed than I am on her. I was sort of thinking the same thing that she was just. I said, man, this is sort of, I mean, really, but
I mean,
okay.
Hamptonites, please. That was
Yeah,
not
I
an
mean,
early 20th century. I don't know.
right,
I
right.
can't.
But
I
we
can't.
do love the name. And really, to this day, and I mean, you could even mentioning this in terms of present day, I mean, there are, due to the elevation, there are these beautiful, views of the bay, of the ocean, the surrounding land. And really, Esperanza, it is like a forest. There is a tremendous amount of preserved land here, state preserved land, really hundreds of acres, honestly, surrounding it that sort of add to this entire thing. There are horse farms
Yeah,
nearby. I mean,
and you can hear me now.
now you're back.
Sorry, I
Oh
had
my
like a
goodness, do we?
malfunction here with
Yeah.
something happened. Anyway, forgive me.
Full disclosure, we are recording this in the summer where there's 8 zillion people pulling on towers and everything else. So God only
Yeah,
knows
I
what's
don't know
going
what
on out
that
there.
was, but first
But we hear
time.
you. We do hear you perfectly now.
Well, that's great. That's great. And the sound may have changed. What I was going to say was, there are 500 acres allegedly that remain undeveloped that surround Cranberry Hole Road, which we, as far as I'm aware, are the ones, their state park as
Right.
indicated, which to my knowledge were the ones that belonged to the fish factory, to the Smithmeal Corporation. Not, as one could have thought, were they original, part of the original 1,000 acres of the Devon Colony, which I'm sure just got subdivided and sold along the way
Yeah,
in ensuing years.
I would assume so. I mean, there is lots of land here. Peconic Land Trust is involved in a lot of this. There's state-owned land. As a general rule, Napeague into Montauk is a tremendous amount of preserved land. And to Esperanza's point, is it possible that of these 1,000 acres, this went back, these original that the state is now preserved probably were owned at that point by these families. But again, I'm
No,
unclear.
I'm saying that these
Yeah,
were part of the fish factory, the
yeah,
state park. That yeah, if that was clear, yeah.
yeah.
Um, anyway,
It's a good part to segue into the fish factor for a minute. We did
well,
an
yes,
episode of
exactly.
the
That's
Promised
where
Land,
I
and
was kind of going, because
yeah,
this, we did an episode on that as well, and I know that we mentioned sort of an apocryphal or an anecdotal an anecdote shared by Dan Ratiner from Dan's Papers, that one of these Cincinnati families, this Midwestern families, had chosen to settle, summer settle in this area, and came out, unpacked, went to bed. The wind shifted overnight, and they woke up to the stench of the fish factory across the way.
the smell of
And they
money,
packed up,
Esperanza.
the smell of money for the locals anyway. And they packed up and went back home to Cincinnati. I mean, I just wonder whether that actually was the case
I,
with any of these
yeah,
four founding families.
I remember talking about that when we did the episode on Promised Land. And actually, again, it's one of those things. We don't know if that's folklore. We don't know if there's a shred of truth to it, or it's all true. But Esperanza, it did make for a great story. There's no question
It
about
did,
that. It
and
really
well,
did.
it did, and but I would say, it would seem to me like these families, they hung on. They were there for. I mean, these homes are still there with certain, renovations through the years, but they're still there, including one that stayed in the same family, the Rowe house. Through four generations. So clearly that wasn't the family that packed up and went back to
Yeah,
Cincinnati.
that would seem to be true. And that was a good segue, Esperanza, because it should be noted that yes, while it's possible some of these houses might have changed hands, over the years, to a large extent, they have remained within the family. It's very generational, it's a very generational kind of place here. So I think that really that integrity, if you will, seems to have been maintained. But we should really touch on what really might have been the heart of the community, which was the Devon Yacht Club.
Mm.
And we got some of this information from an East Hampton. It was actually an East Hampton library, Long Island collection, but we saw it in the East Hampton store. This article goes back about 4 or 5 years, but it talks about how, first of all, the structure of the club itself still largely resembles what was built in 1908. And if you ride by there, you really see those bones. I mean, this place is
Until they're going to knock it down soon.
there's talk of that, and
Oh no, there's no talk. It's actually.
this is okay. It's it's time to bring on the somber Our Hamptons
Oh
podcast. Let me
gosh, yeah.
just, but
Mm.
but the club's early years benefited from this colony. They really played a key role. They provided financial support in the early days, according to what we're reading here from the Long Island collection. Under a 10-year agreement, the colony leased the Gardiners Bay building and 5 acres of land to the Devon Yacht Club for $1.
Yeah.
So these people were pretty. We'll give them that. There was big sporting activities, tennis matches, sailing races, sailing lessons for the kids. This was the kind of place, really, that it was. And I guess really that this club was the heart of it. And it's funny, I'm reading even current to bringing it to present day Esperanza. Uh, it's apparently, and you made this point before we started, it's one of these old school kind of places. The fact that they keep some of these old rules in place is not that uncommon, right? I mean,
No,
you
I mean
still,
that's what really, it's a very sort of waspy thing. But tradition is a continuation of life and heritage, and so it's important.
yeah. And there's still a dress code reminiscent of when you used to go with your family to Gordon's and Amagansett. I'm
Yep,
sure these
jackets
people,
required.
right, jackets required. There was a dress code, dress code needed at the tennis courts. According to a local realtor who lived and worked in the area, according to this article, I can't say I've heard this myself, Esperanza, but he's claiming they still shoot off a cannon at sundown. I don't know.
Well, Paul Brennan would know, I suppose.
I mean, I live in Springs. I've never heard this cannon even in the distance,
Must be a
but
tiny cannon.
yeah, yeah,
Well, that
or the
said, though, remember, Erwin, they do have every July, they do have the fireworks. So
that
they
is
do shoot
true.
off those cannon.
That 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 really is true. But again, this is sort of it's a different, it's really a different kind of environment. And this article really does go on to say of the five original homes, they are all still standing. And yes, some have had extensive renovations, alterations over the years, but unlike so much of what's gone on, they haven't been reduced to rubble and rebuilt. They've been here for over 100 years. And again, many of them remaining in the same families since they were built.
hmm hmm Yeah, it's well, and it's I the fact that they still exist, are intact, remain, with their integrity, as you have said, is really a testament to the stewardship of the people that have owned them, in both the ones that have, if they've remained in the same families, obviously we hats off to them for doing that. But if they've changed hands, let us hope that they will continue to be preserved. And to me, this should be a historic district, just like the Seven Sisters,
Add it to the list.
right? No
Add it to
doubt.
the list before it's too late. But yeah,
Exactly.
it's really, and again, just a different, I think this was sort of an interesting opening the door to sort of a different, we use the term off radar Esperanza on our Hamptons a lot, but this place is it is a little bit off radar.
It's a quiet place, right? It's
Yeah.
not flashy, even though the structures could appear to be so, and they're large and so forth. But really, it's a very discreet, quiet place, which is, let's hope it remains that way.
I mentioned Esperanza before this podcast started, before when we had our little pre-podcast dialogue. It's not completely analogous, but it sort of has a little bit on a much smaller scale, a Georgia Association kind of vibe, just quieter, it's a little bit more sedate. It's yeah, I mean, I hate using a term like it feels more like old money kind of place, but that is, sort of what it feels like. But all right, Esperanza, I think I think
We end on a quiet note.
we end on on a quiet note. Yeah, it was this was an interesting episode. We had a little glitch in between. We had a momentum stopper, but after 60 some odd episodes, we seem to recover nicely.
Not bad, not bad. Yeah, right. So our listeners, bear with us as we produce our
Uh,
low, our
it- yeah,
low budget but high
w-
quality content.
I like that, Esperanza. We should really, that's right, because Esperanza and I are not recording in some fancy studio here. Okay. we have our basic microphones. We're looking at each other on our laptops, and our Hamptons is down home, and that's what we try to give you. But Esperanza, this was an interesting journey to take with you, and as always, a pleasure.
Thank you, Erwin, and until next time.
Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.